Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Jamie. I am the Barefoot Dyer on Instagram and Facebook. I share free online natural dye education and tutorials, as well as online natural dye courses and in-person workshops. Today's video was inspired by a question box that I opened on Instagram, where I asked people who were new to natural dyeing or beginners in their journey of natural dyeing, what was their biggest place of concern or confusion, or what was the biggest question that they had surrounding natural dyeing. In today's video, I will be answering the 5 questions that were asked most frequently. Not surprisingly, these were also questions that I myself was very curious about when I began my natural dye journey. So if you're new to natural dyeing or you've just discovered natural dyeing and you're really interested in learning more, but maybe feeling a little bit confused or overwhelmed with all the processes involved or all of the information available online and not sure who can be trusted, then this video is for you. So my very first piece of advice is going to go completely against popular opinion, and it might seem really counterintuitive, but I advise to not go out and buy every natural dye guidebook out there. And this is not to say that there aren't some great natural dye resources available. Sourcing from every dye book can be overwhelming for a few reasons. The main reason is that you might find minor changes in each recipe and minor changes in the information given from dyer to dyer. And then you're left in the same spot of not really knowing who to trust or what information is accurate, and you're going to be doing a lot of trial and error and possibly spending a lot of time and resources trying to figure out what books are giving you the information that you actually want to follow. Instead, I highly recommend finding a mentor, somebody online who you can research and look into and decide whether or not this person seems to know what they're talking about and is well educated in the subject and is open to you asking questions and kind of guiding them through the process. This may seem a little bit challenging, however, there are a few different ways that this can look. This can look like finding a natural dye Facebook community group that you're able to ask questions and get answers from experienced natural dyers. This may look like finding somebody on Instagram who's open to you asking questions. I encourage everyone who follows me on Instagram to please send me messages when they have questions, because I love problem solving and troubleshooting. So it's something that I love to do, and I know that it can be hard in the beginning, so I love to help people who are in those beginning stages of natural dyeing, just trying to figure everything out. It can also look like finding an online teacher who offers online courses, who is able to communicate back and forth when you have a question and offers feedback. For instance, my online course is composed of pre-recorded video lessons. So the students are able to watch the lessons and then ask questions as they go through them. And then I'm able to see the questions and respond in real time. So this is another way where you have somebody who's able to help you troubleshoot and help you figure out the things that are most confusing to you. So now I'm going to jump straight into the part of natural dyeing that seems to be the most challenging and confusing for people who are just beginning their natural dye journey. And for good reason, because there's a lot of conflicting information out there, like I said before. So we're going to be talking now about pre-treating your fibers, which means scouring, which is a deep clean, and then mordanting, which is how you prepare your fibers so that the dyes will bond onto the fiber. And so I promise you all, this does not have to be as scary and confusing as it seems. And you can really do this minimally. So my whole focus with this video is thinking of someone who's just getting started and maybe you don't have all the supplies yet. And even that can seem overwhelming, and we're going to touch more on the supplies that you really need in the beginning in just a minute. But for now, I just wanted to show you the minimal set of things that you need for the scouring and the mordanting process. So you really only need to have, for scouring, soda ash and a pH neutral industrial strength detergent such as Synthropol. You'll need a stainless steel pot, a spoon, and some water. That's all you'll need for scouring. You can use the same pot for scouring, mordanting, and dyeing. So you can start your whole natural dye journey with just one pot. For your scouring and mordanting processes, you really do want a stainless steel pot. Some dyers do choose to use other types of pots for dyeing, but that's a whole other conversation. For now, to start, one stainless steel pot is a great way to go. For mordanting, if you're going to be mordanting cellulose fibers, which means cotton, linen, hemp, anything made from a plant, you're going to just need a source of tannin, so that can look like a tannin you buy from an online supplier that's already extracted and can be easily dissolved in water. Or if you live in a place where lots of oak trees grow, you might have something called oak galls, which is the kind of tannin that I prefer to use. So this and this are really the same thing. This has just been processed. These are easy to use as a raw dye material and a really, really sustainable and cheap way to go about mordanting. And then you'll need an aluminum mordant, such as aluminum acetate. A lot of people use aluminum potassium sulfate, and that's especially helpful if you're going to be mordanting protein fibers, but I recommend aluminum acetate for cellulose fibers. So this is all that you'll need for the whole process of pre-treating your fibers besides a source of water. So it really doesn't have to be so complicated and scary. I have blog post tutorials for scouring and mordanting, and I go into depth about the processes and how they work in my course and on my Instagram and my stories. So if you're really wanting to dive deeper and learn how to do these things, check out those resources. Another tip is to know your dyes before you go into using them. So there is a large pool of misinformation online about natural dyeing, like we've already talked about. And this really goes through every step of natural dyeing. There is misinformation about mordanting, there's misinformation about dyes. And just because a plant makes a color in a pot and looks like it's going to attach to a fiber doesn't mean that it's actually a good dye plant. So knowing your dyes is a really helpful way to avoid the headache of spending all the time on pre-treating your fabric and then taking that precious fabric and putting it into a dye pot and then having that dye end up being really fugitive, which means it doesn't last, it washes out quickly or fades really quickly in the sun. So if you have looked online, you might have seen people dyeing with things like red cabbage, beets, the edible parts of vegetables and fruits, berries, or spices. And sadly, a lot of these things aren't actual dye. They lack the molecular structure needed to actually bond on to the fiber. So instead of being a dye, they're a stain, which means they're fugitive and they're not going to last. And unless you're just experimenting and you want to dye something with something that's not going to last, which is totally up to the dyer, but unless that's your goal, those might be disappointing dyes to use. If you're hoping to use food waste dyes, don't lose hope because there are a few that make really great dyes. Some of the best are pomegranate skins, onion skins, and avocado pits or skins. So these all make great dyes. They range on a scale from color fastness, so pomegranate skin being the most color fast, avocado pits and skins being the least, but they all include some of the phytochemicals necessary to make a good dye plant. And of course, foraging is another great way to not only save money, but add a level of sustainability to your dye practice if you're sustainably foraging, and to experiment and play, which is really one of the most fun parts about natural dyeing in my opinion. And so you can look up in your area what plants might grow that make good dye plants, or if you find some plants or flowers or leaves that you feel like might be good dye plants, you can test them yourselves. You can dye with them, you can conduct color fast and wash fast tests, and you can even test for some of the phytochemicals like I said before. Some of my very favorite locally foraged dye plants are acorns, oak galls, sycamore leaves, coreopsis flowers, and four-nerve daisies. Not only have I tested these to ensure that they're great dye plants, but there is also a lot of information out there about some of them. And that's another tip is that you can, if you're able to identify a plant, you can Google it and you can look into it and you can try to figure out what phytochemicals are in that plant, and that can lead you down the journey to discovering whether or not it's a good dye plant. And just like any other skill that you're learning for the first time, Natural dyeing can be a challenge, and you're going to have mistakes and you're going to have trial and error, and it's kind of part of it. But I really encourage you to embrace those mistakes as learning opportunities. I highly encourage you to keep track of everything you're doing and to take notes and to write things down as you're experimenting and learning. I often reference my early dye journals and look back at them, and I'm so glad I have those notes. So a dye journal is a great way to do this. And I have a free printable natural dye journal, and I'll link it in the description box below. And this could be a really helpful resource to somebody who's just beginning their natural dye journey. A dye journal will guide you through what types of notes to take, and then also give you a section just to take your free notes and to be able to explain the whole process that you took. That way you're not wondering or trying to recreate a color and wondering, how did I make that color, or what was the process that involved in this particular dye project. What do you actually need for dyeing? What supplies are necessary? I can tell you, you don't need a dye studio, you don't need a ton of space, you don't need a dedicated space to natural dyeing. When I first began my natural dye journey, I was living in a small one-bedroom apartment, and I did all of my natural dyeing in my kitchen and on my balcony. So you don't need a dye studio in order to start your natural dye journey. I still do a lot of my natural dyeing on my kitchen stove. I actually have a dye pot on my kitchen stove right now. I also love to move my natural dyeing outside. I have a portable burner that I use to do natural dyeing outside. So you really don't have to have this huge amount of space. You can keep pretty much everything you need to begin in one little cabinet, and that's how I began. The most important thing to consider when you're thinking about what space you want to natural dye in is great ventilation. So I often have windows open and my vent fan going when I'm dyeing in the kitchen. Outside, you obviously have lots of ventilation, so you don't have to worry about that as much. But if you are going to be dyeing inside, just consider how you're going to ventilate the area and make sure that all of the fumes from the dyes aren't coming into your space. That's not to say that every fume is toxic, but there are some that you don't want to be breathing in. So here on the table, I have everything that you would really need to begin your natural dye journey, plus some. So it's going to look a little different depending on what your goal is and what your vision is for your dye journey. But like I mentioned before, you can do all of your pre-treatment and dyeing in one stainless steel pot. You'll just want to make sure that you're cleaning it really well between each different process. You can have one spoon that you could use for all of your processes as well. You'll need the scouring and the MORDANTING materials that we talked about earlier. You'll need a heat source, whether it be your kitchen stove or a portable burner such as this one. A scale is actually something I put on the optional list. I mean, you really would want to have one if you're trying to get precise results and start your journey in an easy way. However, you could eyeball things in the beginning. I definitely did, so that's up to you, but this is a cheap scale that measures in grams. It's extremely helpful if you're wanting to follow recipes and dye things in a way that is easily noted and repeated. You're going to want your dye source, your materials that you're going to be using for dye. So that's going to look different for everyone. These are dried avocado pits and coreopsis flowers that I've foraged and dried. So starting with food waste and foraged items is a great way to begin your journey. You can also go the route of buying dyes from an online retailer. So they'll come in packages. They often come with instructions on weight of fiber and how to use them. So you'll need a dye source. You'll want a jar and a spoon to pre-measure and pre-dissolve things along the way. A metal stainless steel sieve to strain your dyes. Rags and cotton cloth to clean up after yourself and also to use for straining your dyes. And of course, you're going to want the fiber that you're going to be dyeing. And with this small set of things, you can really begin your natural dye journey. And when you start small, it gives you the opportunity to sustainably add on to your supplies, whether that be thrifting dye pots or foraging for dye plants. It's really up to you, but this way you don't have to just go buy brand new dye supplies, and it gives you time to add on slowly. So I forgot to mention one really important supply, and that's rubber gloves. You want to add a pair of rubber gloves to your necessary supply list. But that leads me into the next thing I want to really quickly cover, which is safety. So I know in the beginning of dyeing, it can be really tempting to grab a pot and a spoon and things that you're using for food as well to dye in, especially if you're going to be using food waste as your dye material. But I strongly urge you to have a completely separate set of pots and spoons and everything that you'll be using for dyeing that will never be used for food ever again. This is not just the safest way to go about natural dyeing. I hope that this video was helpful to you, and I hope that it maybe minimized some of your fears or concerns surrounding natural dyes. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them in the comments below or hop on over to my Instagram and you can reach me there as well. Like I said, I love to chat about natural dyes, so please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. And I will be linking all of the resources I talked about during this video in the description box below. I hope that you all have a really awesome day.